Okay, we're going to go on to our second set of notes today. We're going to be discussing photosynthesis. And I mentioned this in the pod earlier, but if you're like, oh, Miss Dorston, we've been over photosynthesis like 4,000 times. I know, I feel the same way, but we're going to go a little more in depth into it today. Plus, we cannot study plants without discussing the most important plant process. So, before we get started, make sure you either have the printed notes. I did remember to attach them to the pod this time. Or you can have a piece of paper and a pen or pencil. This lesson is pretty short. It should go pretty quick. So if you have to do it by hand, this one's not a bad one to do. If you're doing the handwritten notes, just make sure you again write your name at the top, number 2 in the top right corner. The title is photosynthesis, and then you want to have your divider line with your main topics on the left and details will go on the right. So, for the definition of photosynthesis, I believe we've discussed this before as well, but if you remember from your Greek and Latin roots, the Greek root photo means light, okay? So we get the word photograph, photosynthesis, things like that. A photograph, graph means to write, right? Like to write, write with a pen or a pencil. Um, so a photograph is like a writing of a piece of light. So the light kind of takes a picture and writes down what you would see, kind of thing. And then the root synthesis means to make. So literally, photosynthesis means to make with light. Photosynthesis then is the process in which a plant uses the sun's energy to make its own food. Okay. Yes, the plant is making things with light. Obviously, the sun's rays are coming here to the plant. The plant will then take in the sun's rays and use it to create its own food. This is the definition we're going to use then for photosynthesis, the process in which a plant uses the sun's energy to make its own food. Okay. If you're doing the handwritten notes, this is where you should be. Feel free to go ahead and pause the video to get caught up. Up here in Greek, photo means light and synthesis means to make. So therefore, photosynthesis means to make with light. This little star right here is where I wrote the full definition. It is the process in which the plant uses the sun's energy to make its own food. Where does it happen? Photosynthesis happens in the chloroplast, which is a special organelle found only inside of plant cell. Again, don't forget that plant cells have this extra layer of protection out here, this cell wall. And then one of the other differences is, like we mentioned, they have the large vacuole, while an animal cell has many small vacuoles. And then one of the other main differences is the chloroplasts, okay? So I guess in this diagram I mentioned the other day that I wasn't sure if these were the chloroplasts or not, but I guess according to this picture they are. So the chloroplasts are floating all throughout the cell. I'm going to show you in a little bit some pictures of what a plant cell would look like under a microscope. But they're kind of floating all around the cell. Honestly, most of the cell is made up of water. The vacuole there in the middle takes up quite a bit of room. But the chloroplasts are kind of floating around the cell, and they are used for photosynthesis, but they're also what make the cell, or what make the plants look green. So they these little organelles, they capture the sun's energy and use it to make glucose. Okay, this is the big deal right here, which is a simple sugar molecule using carbon dioxide and water. Okay, so we mentioned before, and we'll get to it later on, that carbon dioxide is what goes into the plant cell for photosynthesis to happen, and we'll go a little more in detail about that in a little bit. The molecule inside of the organelle. Now, this is really important to mention because the chloroplasts are organelles. Okay, it's not a molecule. The organelle is a small, little, almost like a tiny organ inside of the cell. The molecule that's actually inside of the chloroplast is the chlorophyll. So the chlorophyll is the molecule, and it is technically inside of the chloroplast. So if the chloroplast is the organelle, we can say it's filled, quote unquote, with chlorophyll. And this molecule is what actually gives the plant its green color. So the chlorophyll is really the the MVP, most valuable player here, because this is the super, well, I don't want to box that, but this is the super important part because this molecule is what allows the process to take place. Again, if you're handwriting your notes, this one's a little bit darker because I had to retake it later on, and I didn't edit it to make it brighter. But on the left, your topic is where photosynthesis takes place. It happens in the chloroplasts. Not that you can see that when I draw right through it like that. Happens in the chloroplasts. The chloroplasts capture the sun's energy and use it to make glucose, a simple sugar molecule using CO2, which is short for carbon dioxide. If you don't remember that this means carbon dioxide, then you're going to want to write that out, and water. Chlorophyll is the molecule inside the chloroplast that captures the sun's energy and makes it green. Okay, then this arrow here just means I'm going on to the back of the page. Most photosynthesis takes place in a plant's leaves. So photosynthesis can only happen where the chloroplasts with the chlorophyll are. So it can only happen in the parts of the plant that are green in color, I believe. So the stem could perform photosynthesis, but the leaves are better at it. And this is one of the reasons why leaves are broad, okay, bigger like this, as opposed to the skinniness of the stem. These broad leaves give the plant more ability to catch more light, kind of like holding a big, like, what are those things called? Like radar disc or whatever, like a satellite dish, basically. The bigger it is, the more it will collect. So the broad leaves collect more sunlight, and that's also why they're generally turned up to the sun. That way they can capture as much of the sun's light as possible. In photosynthesis, specific details here, the plants use carbon dioxide, which we know the formula for that is CO2. Technically, this 2 should be a subscript 2 down here. They use the carbon dioxide to make their food, and they release oxygen into the air. If you remember, well, we'll get to the equation again later, but CO2 comes in and oxygen goes out. Again, really important for us because we need this stuff to come back out. The plant takes in the carbon dioxide and releases the oxygen into the air through these microscopic pores. Okay, let me stop there. A pore is like a little hole. If you look at your arm or your hand or really any part of your body, you have pores all over your body. It's like little holes. In fact, that's where the sweat comes out of your body through your pores. Oxygen can come out of your body through your pores. It's just like it's like kind of like aerating your skin, basically. But these microscopic pores inside of a plant cell they're kind of look like little slits, and they're on the leaves, usually on the underside, and they're called one little hole is called a stoma. If you're going to pluralize that, saying that the plant has more than one hole, like you're talking about all of the stomata, then you would use the word stomata. Okay, so here's a close-up view of what the stoma look like, okay? On the underside of the leaf, if you were to zoom in really, really far, and I mean like microscope kind of zoom in, you would be able to see these little stoma here. They almost look like little mouths, like little human mouths almost. And what's cool about the stoma is when they need to, they'll open up voluntarily, just like a mouth, and they will allow a gas exchange. So CO2 comes in, oxygen goes out. Sometimes they'll also allow water to come in, and then when they need to keep everything inside, they close again, just like a mouth, okay? This is more of a microscopic view here. You can see that would be a stoma, and that would be a stoma. Okay. This video down here actually doesn't work. I took it out of it before I downloaded this, but up here I will have this video posted for you once you finish this video with the notes, but that will be in the pod for you to see. And it's pretty cool. She kind of has a funny sounding voice a little bit because she's very like sing-songy, but it's good information, and she does show you how you would be able to find stoma on a leaf. Okay, this is just another view of stoma under a microscope. I have no idea what kind of plant this is, but it looks super cool and colorful. But I kind of describe it like, it looks like two like macaroni noodles almost, like one's kind of like this, and then one's kind of like this. And they kind of like bump up against each other, and then it will close when it needs to trap things, keep it in, and it will release when it's time to let it go. So for example, one example of when the plant would want to keep its stoma closed is if it's a particularly dry season, there's not a lot of water, they don't want to open because that will allow the water inside of the plant to escape, which would make the plant dry up, obviously, if there's not a lot of water for it to soak back up. So in particularly dry seasons, those stoma will typically stay a little more closed than open. All right, and then this is the part that should be a review. The simple chemical equation for photosynthesis, you do have to write this. Remember, there's three things that go into the little engine or machine. This arrow here is like an equal sign, basically. But these three things go in: sunlight, CO2, and H2O, which we know this stands for sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water. And what comes out is sugar. Technically, this is glucose. Ooh, let's see if I can write glucose. Maybe not. Glucose plus, that's one of the things. So 1, 2, and 3. So glucose comes out, as well as O2, which is oxygen, and H2O, which is water vapor. Another way that we said that was we said water does come out, but it's just a little bit. Just a little bit. It's really more like steam, basically. That was with the experiment where if you put the plastic bag over the plant that's still living and kind of tie it off for a little bit, in a couple of days or hours, you should be able to see some water droplets forming on the inside of the bag. That's through transpiration, and anyway, that's the water vapor being released from the stoma. Okay, so if you're doing your handwritten notes, there was one little part that I was not able to fit on the other side as far as where photosynthesis takes place. And I said most photosynthesis takes place in a plant's leaves. Okay, but then you're going to add your next topic over here, which is the chemical equation, getting into the more chemical side of things. Plants use the CO2, which is carbon dioxide, to make their food, and they release O2, which is oxygen, into the air. It's released through microscopic pores that look like little slits on their leaves. And the pores are called stoma. I put a box around that because that's a pretty important term. And then I just drew a little picture here. Right here is my little leaf that I drew. And then over here, I drew the stoma, kind of zoomed in just so I remember what it looks like. And then at the bottom, we have the equation, and I made sure to write that. If you remember the formula for glucose, the formula is C6H12O6, okay, which we know is, let me get a different color here, 6 carbon, 12 hydrogen, and 6 oxygen bonded together to make that one glucose molecule. Shout out to Trinity. She was the only person that messaged me and tried to get that answer correct. But if you remember that, you can write that formula in place of the word glucose over here, because that is obviously the same thing. But just make sure you have that equation written down in your notes.